Joining us now to break down the big news of the day, progressive activist Jordan Ewell. Welcome back to the Damage Report.
John, thank you for having me.
Good to have you here, and we've got some big stories to talk about today, starting with Mitch McConnell. NBC reports that the Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell's two great-great-grandparents owned at least 14 slaves between them, all but 2 of them female. We're gonna get into Mitch McConnell's recent comments about reparations in just a minute, but this reporting is certainly interesting. How did you react when you saw this?
I don't know if I was surprised. It is interesting when people look back into their lineage and see who their ancestors were. My family has done that and found that like our ancestors came over on the Mayflower. I don't think any of us owned slaves, but I mean, for Mitch McConnell, someone who has cozied up to conservative heritage groups in the past, most famously like posing in front of the Confederate flag and receiving an award from one of these groups, to find out that his ancestors owned slaves, I guess wasn't too surprising.
Exactly, and look, my family's not from the South. I would imagine that these days you probably would not like actively tell your kids about that if you knew that it was in your family history. But it is interesting that in multiple, both written histories of the McConnell family and his own recollections, he's never mentioned it. And he's talked about his ancestors specifically at this time, including the father of one of those great-great-grandfathers. So he does seem to have some knowledge about what they were doing, but never was there any reference to them owning slaves. But what makes it certainly interesting and timely is his recent commentary on the new conversation about the possibility of reparations, with him saying recently, "I don't think reparations for something that happened 150 years ago when none of us currently living are responsible is a good idea. We've tried to deal with our original sin of slavery by fighting a civil war, by passing landmark civil rights legislation. We've elected an African-American president." So I guess case closed?
Hey man, racism's over. I think the problem is with people like Mitch McConnell and others on the right, and I guess there's transcend to the left as well, but people who are opposed to some sort of redistribution of wealth to correct like past injustices and systemic discrimination. The biggest issue that I see is that they just fail to recognize the systemic impacts that these programs, the institutions like slavery and Jim Crow era laws had on the African American and Black communities. Like this is just, he can't recognize it, just as like Tucker Carlson can't recognize it. These people don't want to acknowledge that they got a head start, whether it's through generational wealth and passing down this wealth, that they got a head start out of free labor, whether it's, they can't acknowledge that redlining had an impact when you redlined Black families into certain neighborhoods poor and made those neighborhoods poor by denying them access to other institutions like jobs and equal pay and healthcare, and then tethered those properties to you tether those property taxes to the educational system. I mean, it's a cross-platform way to discriminate against people, and to failing to acknowledge that those has systemic impacts that transcend decades and impact people today. It's ahistorical, it's foolish, and it's wrong.
And adding on to the ahistorical nature of this, I find it interesting that in a paragraph where he says there shouldn't be reparations because none of us were alive back then, we're not responsible. He then goes on to say, we've fought a civil war, we've passed landmark civil rights legislation. I don't believe, he looks like he could have been in the Civil War. I don't think he fought in the Civil War. He wouldn't have fought on the right side anyway. He didn't pass the civil rights legislation. The only one of those 3 things he cited that he was alive for was electing an African-American president. And I don't really remember, did he vote for Obama? No, I think he actually spent the entire time in the Senate trying to make sure that the first African-American president never got anything accomplished. So it seems weird to take credit for those things.
Yeah, Mitch McConnell's famous quote from when Obama was elected was at this Mexican restaurant on Capitol Hill, Tortilla Coast, where him and Paul Ryan and other Republican congressional leaders met and agreed they were going to vote no on everything. They were going to obstruct everything Obama did, and their goal was to make him a one-term president. Yeah. They had no respect for him, the power that the office of the president had, his platform, anything. They never gave him a fair shake. And to say, oh, hey, we elected a Black president. Well, man, you didn't do anything. You opposed him every step of the way.
For more political news breakdowns, interviews, stories of activism, and me trying my hardest to care about the occasional big celebrity news story, subscribe to our YouTube channel at youtube.com/thedamagereport. And you can ring the bell wherever it is so you don't miss anything.